James Madison was a Virginia scholar and political philosopher who became the architect of American democracy. James Madison, the fourth United States President, was born in Port Conway, Virginia on March 16, 1751. He came from a prosperous planter family. He had a slight frame and quiet demeanor. Madison's family estate was substantial. He was educated by private tutors before attending the College of New Jersey, now Princeton University, where he studied history, government, and law. Then in 1771, after completing his studies, the young Madison returned to Virginia where he immersed himself in political philosophy and the rights of citizens. James Madison was born into a slave-owning family. The Madison plantation relied on enslaved labor. In 1774, when tensions between the colonies and Britain intensified, Madison joined the local Committee of Safety. Madison, though physically frail, was passionate about liberty and colonial rights. Madison began his political career in earnest during the Revolutionary period. He served on Virginia's Constitutional Convention in 1776. He was instrumental in drafting Virginia's Constitution and advocating for religious freedom. Madison believed deeply that government should not interfere with matters of conscience. He worked alongside Thomas Jefferson to establish the principle of separation of church and state in Virginia. In 1780, Madison was elected to the Continental Congress. He was one of the youngest delegates but quickly became one of the most influential voices. Madison witnessed firsthand the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. The national government had no power to tax, no power to regulate commerce, and no executive branch to enforce laws. States acted like independent nations, and the Union was falling apart. Madison returned to Virginia in 1783, deeply concerned about the future of the American experiment. He studied ancient and modern confederacies, reading hundreds of books on government, history, and political theory. Madison became convinced that America needed a stronger national government, one that could unite the states while protecting individual liberty. In 1787, Madison was elected to represent Virginia at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. Madison arrived in Philadelphia early, prepared like no other delegate. He had drafted what became known as the Virginia Plan, a blueprint for an entirely new form of government. The Virginia Plan proposed three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. It called for a bicameral legislature with representation based on population. It established the principle of checks and balances. Madison's plan became the foundation for the debates that followed. Throughout that hot summer of 1787, Madison was the intellectual force behind the Constitution. He spoke more than 200 times during the convention. He took detailed notes of every session, creating the only comprehensive record of the debates. Madison understood that compromise was essential. He negotiated between large states and small states, between northern states and southern states, between those who wanted a strong national government and those who feared tyranny. The Great Compromise created a Senate with equal representation for all states and a House of Representatives based on population. The Three-Fifths Compromise, though morally troubling, allowed southern states to count enslaved people for representation purposes, a concession Madison accepted to keep the convention from collapsing. Madison believed in a government of limited powers, with authority divided between the national government and the states. He championed the concept of federalism, where power flows from the people and is distributed across multiple levels of government. Madison feared the tyranny of the majority as much as the tyranny of kings. He designed a system where ambition would counteract ambition, where no single faction could dominate, where minority rights would be protected. When the Constitution was completed in September 1787, the battle for ratification began. Madison joined forces with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay to write a series of essays defending the Constitution. These essays, known as the Federalist Papers, are among the most important political writings in American history. Madison wrote 29 of the 85 essays. His most famous contribution was Federalist No. 10, where he argued that a large republic would protect against the dangers of faction. Madison explained that in a large, diverse nation, no single interest group could gain control. The very size and diversity of America would be its protection against tyranny. Madison traveled throughout Virginia, debating opponents of the Constitution. Many Americans feared that the new government would destroy state sovereignty and individual liberty. Patrick Henry, Madison's fellow Virginian, warned that the Constitution created a dangerous concentration of power. Madison responded that the Constitution was carefully designed to prevent tyranny through separation of powers and checks and balances. In Virginia's ratifying convention, Madison's arguments proved decisive. Virginia ratified the Constitution by a narrow margin in June 1788. But Madison knew the Constitution was incomplete. Many states had ratified only with the understanding that a Bill of Rights would be added. Madison had initially believed a Bill of Rights was unnecessary, that the Constitution's structure was sufficient protection for liberty. Thomas Jefferson convinced him otherwise. Jefferson wrote from Paris that a Bill of Rights would give the judiciary a legal check on government power and would provide a standard that people could rally around. In 1789, Madison was elected to the First United States Congress. He immediately set to work drafting amendments to the Constitution. Madison reviewed more than 200 proposed amendments from the state ratifying conventions. He distilled them into 12 amendments, 10 of which were ratified and became the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment protected freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. The Second Amendment protected the right to bear arms. The Fourth Amendment protected against unreasonable searches and seizures. The Fifth Amendment protected against self-incrimination. The Eighth Amendment prohibited cruel and unusual punishment. Madison's Bill of Rights completed the Constitution and secured the fundamental liberties that Americans cherish. Madison became a trusted advisor to President George Washington. He helped draft Washington's inaugural address and many of his important speeches. But Madison soon found himself at odds with Alexander Hamilton, Washington's Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton wanted a powerful national government that would promote manufacturing and commerce. He proposed that the federal government assume state debts from the Revolutionary War. He wanted to create a national bank. He favored high tariffs to protect American industry. Madison believed Hamilton's vision betrayed the principles of the Revolution. Madison feared that Hamilton's policies would benefit wealthy merchants and speculators at the expense of ordinary farmers. Madison opposed the national bank as unconstitutional, arguing that the Constitution did not grant Congress the power to charter a bank. Madison and Thomas Jefferson formed a political opposition to Hamilton's Federalist Party. They created the Democratic-Republican Party, which championed states' rights, agricultural interests, and strict interpretation of the Constitution. The political divisions grew bitter. When war broke out between Britain and France in 1793, the Federalists supported Britain while the Democratic Republicans sympathized with France. President Washington issued a proclamation of neutrality, trying to keep America out of the European conflict. Madison supported neutrality but resented British violations of American shipping rights. In 1794, Madison married Dolly Payne Todd, a young widow from Philadelphia. Dolly Madison became one of the most beloved figures in American history. She was charming, gracious, and politically astute. She helped soften Madison's reserved personality and became his partner in political life. Their marriage was one of mutual devotion and respect. When Thomas Jefferson was elected president in 1800, he appointed Madison as Secretary of State. Madison served in this role for 8 years, managing America's foreign relations during a turbulent period. Britain and France were at war, and both nations violated American neutrality. British ships seized American sailors and forced them into service. Napoleon's France confiscated American ships trading with Britain. Madison tried diplomacy, but neither European power respected American rights. Jefferson and Madison tried economic pressure, imposing an embargo on foreign trade. The embargo failed, hurting American merchants more than European powers. In 1808, Madison was elected president. He inherited Jefferson's foreign policy problems. Madison continued trying to defend American rights through economic measures, but the situation deteriorated. Britain refused to stop seizing American ships and sailors. Western Americans believed Britain was encouraging Indian attacks on the frontier. A group of young congressmen called the War Hawks demanded action. They were led by Henry Clay of Kentucky and John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. They wanted to defend American honor and perhaps conquer Canada. Madison reluctantly asked Congress to declare war on Britain in June 1812. It was a controversial decision. The Federalist Party opposed the war. New England states, whose shipping interests were hurt by the war, considered seceding from the Union. Madison faced fierce criticism. The United States was unprepared for war. The army was small and poorly trained. The Navy had only a handful of ships. State militias often refused to fight outside their borders. The war went badly for America. American attempts to invade Canada failed repeatedly. In 1814, British forces invaded the United States. They marched on Washington, D.C. Madison and his cabinet fled the capital. Dolly Madison famously saved important documents and a portrait of George Washington before escaping. The British burned the White House, the Capitol, and other government buildings. It was a humiliating moment for the young nation. But America rallied. American forces won important victories at Baltimore and on Lake Champlain. Andrew Jackson defeated the British at New Orleans in January 1815, though the battle occurred after the peace treaty had been signed. The Treaty of Ghent, signed in December 1814, ended the war without resolving any of the issues that caused it. Neither side gained territory. Britain did not agree to stop impressing sailors. But the war had important consequences. America had survived a second war with Britain. American nationalism grew stronger. The Federalist Party, tainted by its opposition to the war, collapsed. America turned inward, focusing on westward expansion and economic development. Madison's second term saw a transformation in his political views. The war had demonstrated the need for a stronger national government. Madison now supported many policies he had once opposed. He supported a new national bank to stabilize the currency. He supported tariffs to protect American manufacturing. He supported federal funding for roads and canals to improve transportation. Madison's critics accused him of abandoning his principles. Madison responded that circumstances had changed and that practical governance required flexibility. Madison left the presidency in 1817 and returned to his estate at Montpelier in Virginia. He spent his retirement years managing his plantation, though financial problems plagued him. Madison continued to correspond with political leaders and to advise on constitutional questions. He was called the Sage of Montpelier. Madison watched with concern as sectional tensions grew between North and South. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 temporarily resolved the question of slavery's expansion, but Madison knew it was only a temporary solution. He feared that slavery would eventually tear the nation apart. Madison struggled with the question of slavery throughout his life. He owned more than 100 slaves at Montpelier. He recognized that slavery was morally wrong and economically inefficient. He supported gradual emancipation and colonization, the idea that freed slaves should be sent to Africa. But Madison never freed his slaves during his lifetime. He believed that freed slaves could not live peacefully with whites in America. He feared that immediate emancipation would lead to racial violence. These views, though common among white Southerners of his era, represented a moral failure. Madison's inability to resolve the contradiction between his ideals of liberty and his practice of slavery diminished his legacy. Madison's final years were spent working on his papers. He carefully edited his notes from the Constitutional Convention, knowing they would be invaluable to future generations. He wanted Americans to understand the principles and compromises that created the Constitution. Madison died on June 28, 1836, at the age of 85. He was the last surviving signer of the Constitution. His death marked the end of the founding generation. James Madison's legacy is complex and enduring. He was the principal architect of the Constitution, creating a framework of government that has survived for more than 2 centuries. He championed the Bill of Rights, securing the fundamental freedoms that define American liberty. He helped establish the principle of separation of church and state. He developed the theory of federalism and checks and balances. He demonstrated that Republican government could work in a large, diverse nation. Madison believed in reason, compromise, and the rule of law. He showed that political opponents could debate fiercely yet remain committed to constitutional principles. But Madison's legacy is also troubled by his relationship with slavery. He built his wealth on the labor of enslaved people. He helped enshrine slavery's protection in the Constitution through provisions like the Three-Fifths Compromise and the Fugitive Slave Clause. He failed to use his moral authority to challenge the institution that contradicted everything he claimed to believe about human rights and dignity. This failure haunted Madison and would haunt the nation he helped create. James Madison was a man of contradictions, a champion of liberty who owned slaves, an advocate of limited government who expanded federal power, a shy scholar who became a political leader. He was brilliant yet flawed, principled yet pragmatic, idealistic yet realistic. Madison understood that democracy requires constant work, that freedom is fragile, that unity demands compromise. He gave America its constitutional foundation, a system of government designed to protect liberty while enabling effective governance. Madison's constitution has endured through civil war, economic depression, world wars, and social upheaval. It has been amended, interpreted, and reinterpreted, but its basic structure remains. That is James Madison's gift to America and to the world, a constitution that balances power and liberty, that protects minorities while respecting majorities, that divides authority while creating unity. Madison was, in the end, the father of the Constitution, the architect of American democracy, and despite his failings, one of the greatest political thinkers in human history.